Mistress Vania Changes Jobs, Episode 10. With the man in the cap gone, Mistress Vania and Riko returned their attention back to Roger. "What was that man saying?" asked Riko. "It would seem," said Mistress Vania, "that our car is very similar to one owned by a famous jockey, someone who appears in the local press. How that qualifies as news I don't know." "We must push him in all the way," said Riko, referring to Roger's legs, which were hanging out of the trunk. The two women applied strenuous effort to the task of getting the back half of Roger into the trunk. The task seemed to be virtually impossible. The trunk was spacious, but Roger's unconscious body was hard to move or arrange in any way. It also refused to bend. "We can use ropes," said Riko, with an eager enthusiasm. "He will not move. We will secure him like lumber." "I suppose we have little alternative," conceded Mistress Vania, "assuming that we can get the ropes and blanket out of the trunk." Riko managed to reach in with one arm through the gap in the trunk that was not currently completely filled by Roger. With great effort she extricated a small sports bag. Wrapping a thin blanket over Roger's legs, Riko used an elaborate selection of knots to complete her task. By the end of the process, Roger's legs were bound, and the lid of the trunk was tied down hard on his legs, which still hung out from the knees to the feet. "That will have to do," said Mistress Vania. With Riko driving, the two women drove through the streets of Hapton Shufti, hoping not to attract any attention. They passed the shining new premises of the Hapton Shufti Lexus dealership. In the window was a large poster of celebrity jockey Nick Dunn and his new car. "It is a strange thing, coincidence," said Mistress Vania. "No one ever notices a Lexus. That would be a fine thing." Stopping at the traffic light, there were 4 pedestrians waiting to cross. As soon as they spotted the Lexus, they all started waving. "It's Nick Dunn," said a teenager. He was carrying a Labrador dog, which had a plaster cast on its hind leg. The effort of carrying this well-fed animal caused him considerable strain. As he weaved across the intersection, he suddenly changed direction and weaved towards the car, arriving at the driver's side window. The Labrador licked and slobbered on the glass. "It's someone else," said the teenager, looking through the glass, which had now become opaque with dog slobber. "It's someone from China. You Nick Dunn's chauffeur? Check this out. Nick Dunn's got a driver." The lights turned green and the car pulled away. "This is intolerable," growled Mistress Vania, looking in disbelief at the driver's side window. The trip to the house was short, and once in the garage, Mistress Vania and Riko had a new problem. "How do we get him out?" said Riko. "He cannot be carried. We have done too much too soon. We should have worked our way up to the big one. We are not ready." "Riko," said Mistress Vania sternly, "we are independent, intelligent women. We can move a fat man from the trunk of a car to a cellar." "I am sorry," said Riko, bowing her head. "We can do it." "That's better," said Mistress Vania, smiling. "A positive attitude is essential in these situations. I had not anticipated this problem, so I gave it much thought while we drove back to the house. Do you still have some black plastic sheeting, the kind used for the work on the cellar?" "Yes," said Riko. "There is still plenty left, perhaps even 20 yards. "Good," said Mistress Vania. "He's too heavy to carry, so we must slide him instead." "Slide?" said Riko, with a confused expression. Riko went to collect the long roll of black plastic that had been used to protect surfaces from paint and building materials. It was over a yard wide and very long. Mistress Vania extended it to its full length and then cut it into 2 pieces. "There is not enough to reach all the way to the cellar," explained Mistress Vania, "so we will move it in sections. When he reaches the end of one section, we will take the preceding section and move it to the front." This they did, placing the 2 sections end to end. "But how do we slide him out?" said Riko. "He is not slippery." "We will oil him," said Mistress Vania. "We have 5 gallons of cooking oil, but first we must get his clothes off, otherwise the oil will be absorbed by the cloth." "He is too big," said Riko. "His clothes will never come off." Mistress Vania returned with 2 large containers of cooking oil and a pair of scissors. "Cut the clothes off his body," said Mistress Vania, handing the scissors to Riko, "like you would if you were a paramedic treating a patient." Riko set to her task, undoing all the ropes. She then cut off the trousers. Next, climbing onto the trunk, she cut the shirt and jacket, firstly cutting up the sleeves and then down to the waist. The clothing came away in pieces, leaving Roger in his underwear. Riko was given the task of rubbing oil on Roger's body. She found his fat body very unpleasant, yet she was single-minded in her task. Mistress Vania was correct in that frictional resistance was the enemy. With low friction, Mistress Vania and Riko were able to pull Roger from the trunk and onto the plastic sheeting. They then applied more oil to Roger and the plastic. "Tie some ropes to his feet," said Mistress Vania, wiping her hands on a towel. "We will drag him using a rope, otherwise he will be too oily to grip by the wrists or ankles." With both of them on the end of the rope, Roger's bulk slid along the plastic sheet. As they pulled him to the end of one section of plastic, they moved the preceding piece of plastic to the front. This way they moved Roger's unconscious body quickly from the garage to the front door of the house. Inside they repeated the process until they reached the stairs to the cellar. "We cannot hold him on a slope," said Mistress Vania, "not even on stairs." "We can still use the ropes," said Riko. "I will feed the rope through the hand-railing. That way I can control his descent down into the cellar by feeding the rope." They laid the oil plastic on the stairs and added some more oil to Roger. Dressed only in his underwear, Roger's body looked very strange in its lubricated state. "What do you eat to get that large?" said Riko, making sure the rope was wound around the handrail. "It is hard to imagine," said Mistress Vania, trying to arrange Roger so that his head pointed down the stairs. "Most people are a mystery to me, this one tremendously so." Slowly Riko fed in the rope. The handrail creaked with the strain. The rope around Roger's ankles was pulled tight, but Riko's expert knots spread the load and did not cut the skin. "We should be careful," said Riko. "When he is revived, he may be hard to control." "I'll control him," said Mistress Vania with certainty. "Strength is never the issue. It is always the mind." At the bottom of the stairs Roger's body came to rest, with his legs still elevated. Riko quickly undid her existing knots, only to replace them with a new arrangement of ropes. She tied the feet together, and then the wrists. Bending Roger double while he lay on his side, she tied the ankles to the wrists. There was still scope for movement, but no chance of him escaping. "We must wash the oil off him," said Mistress Vania. Riko had put a system of drains into the cellar. This allowed for the submissive to be hosed down with water. Sometimes it might be hot water, while other times it might be an icy cold soaking. "I will need to ready myself," continued Mistress Vania, pulling down the plastic sheet and ascending the stairs. "First impressions are everything in this business." Riko took a hose-pipe and sprayed Roger, who failed to move in any way. Next Riko used some liquid soap, a bucket and a large sponge. These items looked more suited to washing an automobile. Riko was thorough in her cleaning. She hosed Roger again and checked his vital signs. Breathing and a pulse were acceptable. His normal state of health was unlikely to be good, so it was hard for her to judge what was normal for Roger. He was alive. For Riko that was good enough. With the job done, Riko hurried upstairs. For Mistress Vania, getting into a full-length latex catsuit was a two-person job. Whenever she put on one of her outfits, it was as black and shiny as oil on water in the moonlight. It was a point of pride for Riko that she was responsible for the care of this rubber couture. When Roger awoke, it was cold and wet. His ankles and wrists ached. He felt like he had been dragged a mile over a field. He blinked and saw nothing. It was not his eyes, it was the room. The room was not just dark, it was completely black. In his groggy state he tried to move, and at that point became aware of the ropes that bound his wrists to his ankles. Fear rushed through his body, and he began to struggle in panic. Riko's knots were superb. His struggling only caused pain, and if anything the knots only seemed to tighten. Roger's sense of time had been lost, but he had only been alone in the cellar for 15 minutes. The hard tiled floor was painful for him to lie on. In his doubled-over position it was hard for him to breathe. Fear stopped him from calling out. He eventually stopped struggling when it became clear that his efforts were useless. Lying very still, he listened. Footsteps from hard-soled shoes could be heard making their way around the room above. The door at the top of the stairs opened. It was dim beyond the door, so just the outline of the stairs had become visible. He could see only a silhouette. Mistress Vania flicked a wall switch, and a row of fluorescent tubes buzzed while flooding the room in a hard white light. Roger swiveled his head around and could see the beams, rigs, and ropes set up by Riko. Everything was tiles. The room was empty except for a metal table on which were whips, paddles, and other instruments of cruelty. Mistress Vania descended the stairs. Her full-length latex suit shone beautifully in the hard light. Laced black leather knee-high boots clicked on the wooden steps. A black pearl hung on a silver chain sat in her cleavage that was pushed together firmly by the tight-fitting suit. Her long dark hair had been plaited into an elaborate braid which hung over her shoulder and rested on her right breast. Her make-up was perfect, and her lipstick was cherry red. She smiled with her white teeth and blinked with her voluminous lashes. Roger was immediately impressed. He wanted very much to feel admiration for this mysterious woman, but all his drugged mind could manage was blunt, elementary fear. From behind Mistress Vania emerged Riko, with neon running shoes, stockings, red latex miniskirt, and electric blue crop top. She in no way outshone her mistress. In these situations, Mistress Vania saw Riko as an ironic extension of herself, rather than an individual. Immediately Roger recognized Riko. This set off in his mind a chain of associations. He remembered the dating website, the dinner at the restaurant. He was back in the present, and back to reality. He remembered the stabbing of a syringe in his backside, another one in his neck. He knew that he was bound hand and foot, yet seeing the ropes in the glare of the room drew him deeper into a state of panic. A single thought filled his mind. "Oh, you're kidding me," said Roger, his eyes rolling in his head. "It's happening, man. It's really happening. Hank told me this shit was going to go down, but I didn't believe him. But it's really happening." Mistress Vania stared at Roger as though he was a new species. In her mind this summed up Roger very well. Something very different from her regular clients. Roger was something new. Nonetheless, he was making no sense at all. "You're going to steal my kidney, aren't you?" continued Roger. "It's all happening. The Asian chick that dates you and drugs you. Then you wake up in a hotel room in an ice bath. There's a telephone next to the bathtub, and a note saying, 'Don't get out of the bath. Call an ambulance.' Hank, why didn't I listen?" This was very bizarre behavior, and it confused Mistress Vania a great deal. She motioned to Riko to move to the corner of the room to confer. "Kidneys?" Mistress Vania said to Riko. "What is he talking about?" Riko shrugged her shoulders and gave an expression which suggested she was as confused as her mistress. "You've cut out my kidney," cried Roger, moaning. "I can feel the incision. I'm going to die of complications, a botched harvesting of a healthy organ, hemorrhaging followed by death. Screw you, Hank. Screw you for being right. I know who screwed. And now, who screwed in royal style? Good old Roger, with a missing kidney." "He thinks that we are part of the live organ trade," whispered Riko, her expression clearing with understanding. "He thinks that we have stolen his kidney and sold it for a transplant." "He thinks we are thieves," said Mistress Vania, glancing at Roger. "Removing one of his kidneys would definitely make him lighter, but it sounds like a hard way of going about things. As approaches to weight loss goes, it's pretty marginal." Roger continued to groan, as though he was dying. Mistress Vania approached him until she was standing very close to his head. All Roger could see were 2 large, laced black leather boots. "You are not in a hotel room," said Mistress Vania, leaning down to speak in Roger's ear. "Nor are you in an ice bath, and there is definitely no telephone." She took from the table a whip with a black leather handle and a dozen leather strips. She held it in her hand for a moment, considering her options. Changing her mind, she put it back and picked up something that looked similar to a riding crop. It was a stiff thin rod and a square of leather at the end. Roger continued his rant. Mistress Vania walked back to Roger with slow, deliberate steps. Without warning, she took one powerful swing with the riding crop and hit Roger across his fat stomach. The blow fell within the V that was formed by Roger's tied wrists and ankles. It was as loud as a firecracker as it echoed around the tiled cellar. "What was that for?" asked Roger defiantly. Mistress Vania didn't like his tone. "You are in my dominatrix dungeon," she said in a smooth voice that was at odds with the words she was saying, "and you annoy me every time you open your mouth." She hit him again. This time Roger was expecting it. This time it was worse, knowing what was coming. "When I punish you," said Mistress Vania, "I don't even think about you. For me it's like swimming laps in a pool, a pleasant activity that requires little thought, but leaves me feeling vigorous and refreshed at the end. I can do this for hours." "What do you want?" said Roger, adjusting himself to the idea that his inner organs were not the key point of interest. "I don't want anything," said Mistress Vania, her voice slightly raised. "You can't satisfy me. You have nothing I want. You are nothing. You have nothing." "You're a crazy bitch," said Roger. "Really?" said Mistress Vania, laughing. "My submissives soon grow to adore me. They become obsessed and can think of little else. I never think of them unless they're standing in front of me, and even then they're only of marginal interest. I have had some very important people come to me to be dominated. You are the most pathetic specimen I have ever had to deal with. There is so little to work with. I find it hard to know where to begin." Riko took a black wooden paddle the size of a dinner plate and hit Roger savagely across the buttocks.